All right. Hello, my wonderful students. Let's go ahead and get started and talk about our plan for the day. Your warm up was to open up your Chapter 3 Key Issue 2 notes. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and do that. Our objective for the day is to analyze patterns of migration and locate where migrants settled over time, and also analyze patterns of migration within the United States. So on the agenda, we're going to take some notes on Chapter 3, Key Issue 2. I'm going to walk you through the PowerPoint. You'll jot down some notes as I'm talking to you, and then be sure to submit those notes at the end of the class period today. Your homework reminders are again to make sure you turn in these notes before you leave today. Chapter 3, Key Issue 4 is due for Friday, and then your Unit 3 vocab, please make sure that you are working on that. I believe the due date right now is October 20th, and I think that's going to stick. That's probably not going to change. So make sure you're working on that. Don't save it all for the last minute, because procrastinating is not going to help you out. You're just going to end up being stressed at the end. Okay? So again, if you haven't done so yet, please open up those Chapter 3 Key Issue notes. You can handwrite, you can use Kami, you can write on paper in front of you. It doesn't matter to me. You just need to be consistent, and you need to be able to turn it in at the end of class today. So at the top of your note sheet, the very first thing asks you to define international migration and interregional migration in your own words. So go ahead, you can pause me and just take a moment in your own words. What do you think international migration means, and what is interregional migration? All right, so interregional migration, we already talked about what that means, right? Interregional, think of like interstate. If I'm on the interstate, it's taking me from one state to another state. Interregional migration is going to take me from one region to another region. And so what are our motivations for this? Okay, why do people make these interregional migrations? And so it's usually due to some sort of perceived economic betterment. Okay, so typically economic opportunity compels individuals to make interregional migrations. Historically, we saw enticement of abundant available land on the American frontier, enticing people to leave the east coast of the United States and move to other regions in the US. Presently, it's mostly jobs that are enticing people to move. So especially jobs in the service sector that are clustered in urban areas. And so that compels people to leave one region and move to another region. And then if we look at kind of our history of migration throughout the United States, we see our population shift over time. So early population in the United States was clustered on the East Coast, and then slowly over time spread westward. And we can refer to this as like shifting our center of population gravity. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a couple slides here. All right, so you've got this little chart, migration over time in the United States. So in 1790, like I said, virtually all of the US population was hugging the East Coast. So our colonial era settlements were definitely there, right? Think Boston, think Jamestown, and they were again on the Atlantic coast. Between 1800 and 1840, we see people starting to cross the Appalachian Mountains. And so what made this possible was transportation improvements that allowed people to travel inland. And also people were able to obtain a large amount of land for a low price, so that enticed them to move. Between 1850 and 1890, we see the gold rush being the principal pull westward. So we see people migrating all the way to the West Coast, right, California, in search of gold. Between 1900 and 1940, we see our population filling in kind of the Great Plains regions or region. So advances in agricultural technology enabled people to cultivate the tough physical environment, which made it possible for people to live in the Great Plains and to survive and earn income and grow food. And then between 1950 and 2010, we start to see our population moving south. So we see like major cities in Texas that are just booming, like Austin, Texas, right? The population is rapidly growing. And that's for job opportunities. And so if we take a look at our map here, we can see this kind of shift of population over time. So again, our early colonies were right here clustered on the East Coast. And then so slowly over time, we start filling in our population throughout the rest of the United States. And so this map here is kind of interesting. Well, these maps are kind of interesting to take a look at. And this is showing us interregional migration in two different time periods. So we've got 1995 and then again in 2010. And so we've got our different regions in the United States, and our arrows, the width of the arrow, the thickness of the arrow is showing us the migration pattern. So that the width of the arrow represents the amount of people who migrated. So if we're looking up here at 1995, we can see our largest migrations were from the Midwest to the South, and actually from the Northeast to the South as well. But then if we look down at 2010, we can see that we still have like this kind of Midwest to the South and vice versa, but also the West and the South, which is kind of interesting too. Okay, so those first slides there kind of focused on our interregional migration in the United States. Now, let's talk about migration between regions in large countries. So our 5 largest countries in land area in the world are Russia, Canada, China, the United States, and Brazil. And so you need to be a large country to have interregional migration, because you need to be a large country to have a variety of different regions. Okay, so we're going to talk about the interregional migration that happens in these countries. So in Russia, interregional migration was encouraged eastward and northward by the government's decision to locate new factories and to offer economic incentives away from the existing population concentrations. Okay, so if we're taking a look at this map, we can see, right, the vast majority of the population in Russia here is clustered in the West, okay, clustered in kind of the European side of Russia. And then if we take a look at our eastern portion of Russia, it's very, very sparsely inhabited. All right, next we've got Canada. So Canada shares a similar east to west interregional migration pattern with the United States. The 3 westernmost provinces are destinations for interregional migrants. So just like the East Coast is where our early settlements were in the US, same thing for Canada. And then slowly over time, people start moving westward. And then in China, nearly 100 million people have emigrated from the rural interior of China to large urban areas along the East Coast where manufacturing is prevalent. So I'll show you a map on the next slide here, but the vast majority of China's population is clustered on the East Coast. And then in Brazil, the government moved its capital from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia to encourage migration of Atlantic coast residents to move into the interior of the country. Okay, and then as promised, here's that map of China. And we can see right here, right, our provinces on the East Coast definitely have our most densely populated areas in China. And then we can see our arrows representing the migration of people from those rural interior areas to our urban centers that hug the East Coast. Okay, and then next on your note sheet, it asks you to put intra-regional migration in your own words. So go ahead and pause me. And in your own words, what does intra-regional migration mean? Okay, so since the Industrial Revolution began in Europe in the 19th century, a global trend for individuals to migrate from rural to urban areas has occurred. And looking at our kind of change in the urbanized population over time is really interesting. So in the United States in 1800, only 5% of the US population lived in urbanized areas. By 1920, that percent grew to 50. And then by 2010, we see 80% of the population in the United States living in urbanized areas. And so our motivation for intra-regional migration is most often economic advancement. Okay, so people are moving for jobs or for job opportunity. Okay, and so most of the intra-regional migration that we see in developed countries is from cities out to the suburbs. And this is not encouraged or motivated by economic advancement, but it's motivated by a desired lifestyle. So out in the suburbs, we typically have better schools, bigger houses. People can have a driveway and a garage, and can have all those kind of conveniences that we can have in the suburbs that don't necessarily exist in urban areas. So there's additional privacy associated with single-family detached houses. Garages and driveways offer parking at no additional fee, and they're often superior suburban schools. Okay, and so this graphic here kind of shows us this flow of migrants from suburban areas to urban areas and vice versa. So we can see our largest arrow here is definitely people moving out of the cities, right? Moving from the cities out to the suburbs. Although we do have some people who move from the suburbs to the city. I think a lot of times, like often that's younger people. Like I know the majority of my friends after they graduated college, they maybe moved home for a little bit and then got a job and then moved into the city. And so another interesting thing that developed countries experience is what we call counter-urbanization. Okay, so this is a new migration trend during the late 20th century when rural areas were characterized by net in-migration. So what that means is that your rural areas were actually experiencing more migrants moving into those areas than your cities or your suburbs. Okay, so your net migration from urban to rural areas is called counter-urbanization. And counter-urbanization is most prevalent in places rich with natural amenities. So we see this trend in the Rocky Mountain states like Colorado, like Idaho, like Utah, like Wyoming, where people are moving to rural areas for a desired lifestyle, right? I have a cousin who lives out in Billings, Montana. There's nothing around, but it's absolutely beautiful and they love being outdoors. So it works for them, okay? So oftentimes that's why we see this trend of counter-urbanization. Okay, so please make sure that you get these notes turned in before you leave today and you are good to go, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day.